I've been doing basket patterns almost exclusively for 12 years, and I'm still trying to figure it out. The wood I like to use is hard maple and pear. What I'll be doing tonight is pear wood, Bradford pear, ornamental pear, and the box is a threaded lid box. Pass this one around so you can look at it. This is one that's completed with an insert in the lid. Holler at me if I'm on the wrong camera or nobody can see what I'm doing. And I'll pass this around too. And this is also pear wood with a, I'm not even sure what I used on that insert, with some rose engine work on it. This piece is segmented hard maple, and I do that. I use the segmented on the larger pieces because of the grain orientation. So I need, if I do this in a bowl orientation, then you have side grain and end grain. When you have end grain, the ink soaks in a lot darker, deeper, and then you go to the side grain and it goes lighter. And so to compensate for that, I make these segmented rings out of 12 segments and glue them up, and that gives me something that I can do this from, and then the ink absorbs evenly all the way around the outside. And so I use hard maple for that. So the techniques that I'm going to be demonstrating work no matter what you're doing, whether it be a box or a platter or a hollow form, and any of those things will work. Now the grain orientation on this is in a spindle orientation, so that the grain's actually going this way. You know, it grows in the tree like this. And again, the reason for that is then I've got a surface that will cut evenly with the beading tool and will absorb the ink evenly, so I don't have any dark spots. And so let's start out with that. Say again, Paul? I'm off. Yeah. Yeah, when I cut these, you know, I like to get a stump. It's kind of hard to come by a Bradford pear that's this big around, but I'll work all the way around the pith. Now, Bradford pear is an amazing wood. A lot of people look at it as you know, junk wood because there's so much of it. But it has really white grain, which I like for the contrast, and it's surprisingly hard when it gets dry, and the beading tool really likes it. It cuts a nice clean bead. And so my first choice is mountain mahogany, but finding a piece of mountain mahogany that I can do this with is pretty hard. So this is the same, basically same thing that's passed around. It's got a threaded lid on it. I'm going to try to give you a few of the tips that I use as I go on here. Just little things. Some people have a name for that. I like to just call it being thorough. If I can find it. Oh, there it is, right in front of my eyes. So when you put something in the lathe, with basket illusion, the piece you're working on has to be perfectly round, because the beading tool, as it cuts, once it is completely in contact with the surface, it stops cutting. So if you've got something that's out around, you're going to have a nice bead on one side, and the other side it's going to be a flat top bead. And so you have to be working with something that's perfectly round. Now, you know, you put something like this in the lathe, and you look at the center, and it may look like it's perfect. I've learned not to rely on that, and so I'll show you this tool in a minute here. So what this is I think it's a machinist tool, and it's a starter bit. You know, you could put a drill bit in there or something, but it's going to flex. This is stiff enough that it doesn't flex, and so it gives me, even though the center looks like it might be perfect, it gives me a perfect spot for my live center to go that I can trust. Now I want to make sure, if I keep doing weird things, it's because my lathe controls are in different place. So I want to make sure that lid's on tight. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give this a little bit of shape. Now, since this is in spindle orientation, there's several ways that I can do that. You can use a spindle gouge. You know, you can do quite a bit with a roughing gouge. Say again? I don't want... Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And so, you know, you can use a roughing gouge to do a little shaping. What I prefer to do is, because I want to be able to see the profile easier, most of you can take a spindle gouge and do that. I like to be able to see that shape as I go. Now on these boxes like this, as you notice on the one I'm passing around, there's not much shape to it. I like to have the bottom maybe a little narrower than the top. And so I'm just using a regular scraper. And what that gives me is the able to look across there and see that I'm getting the shape that I want. Now finish that off with a skew, and I'm going to use it as a negative rate scraper. And again, I like this because I can really see the profile. Because again, what I want to start with here is I want as smooth a surface as I can get without having to sand it. Now I am going to sand it a little bit, but as you know, when you start to sand, it starts to go out of round. The more you sand, the more out of round it is. Now that's probably okay on just about everything, but again, when you're using a beading tool, the closer to perfect round it is, the closer to perfect round your bead will be. Now, the most important thing about basket illusion pieces is the pattern. And so everything that you do is to not detract from the pattern. And so I've never had anybody come up to me and say, man, those are nice beads on that piece. It's because they're looking at the pattern. So if I do something that just detracts from the pattern, you know, I don't want that. Now, that's pretty smooth, but I am going to go ahead and touch it with sandpaper just to make sure there aren't any grooves in there. And that's about all I'm going to do. Now you might say, now when I get through, the surface you see here is going to be completely gone. Okay, so you may wonder why I'm spending so much time making this surface as perfect as possible, because I'm going to turn beads on this entire surface, and if I do it right, there won't be any of that surface left. But the reason I need to prepare it so well is because if I have one bead that is higher than the other bead, it really shows up. I mean, like you can't imagine. I don't know whether it's because it's an interruption in the shadow or what it is, but if the beads aren't perfectly in line on a perfect surface, you can see it and you can feel it. So that's why, I like to be careful about that. Now the beading tool, this one has a handle on it, but I don't put handles on any of the beading tools anymore because they get in the way. And they're a low impact tool. You don't need handles on them. Now the first place I need to cut, let me think if I'm missing anything. The first place that I need to cut is where that lid joins, okay? Because what I want is the lowest point between two beads to be right on that joint on the lid so that it disappears. If it's part way up or down, it leaves a really sharp spot. You try to fix it and you can see the joint. And so I don't want to see the joint from the lid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the lid off. Is that my heart that keeps going? So let me go over here on the board. So what I'm going to do, it's hard to see these little beading tools. So what I'm going to do, this is my beading tool. Everybody see it all right? What I want is I want the low point of that bead to be right on that spot right there. So I want a bead here, and I want a bead here. And so if this is my beading tool, I'm going to come in like this and catch that bead. Then I'm going to come in and catch that bead. And then I'm going to work from there both directions out. I'm done here. Okay. So that's what I'm going to do. So the idea is for this bead to end exactly on that seam between the lid and the bottom. And so let's cross our fingers and hope that works. This is an 1/8 inch beading tool from D-Way Tools, and these are the best ones out there. So we back up on there. Okay. Now you want the beading tool to cut right at center point or even slightly below. There are, if you watch videos, you'll see different methods on how to do that, how to do the beads. You'll see a lot of them where they'll mark 3 or 4 beads, then come back and finish cutting those beads. That's never worked for me. I completely cut the beads as I go, and that's what works best for me. You want your tool rest close. You notice with the beading tool, as you move the tool rest out, you have to extend the tool, and it goes higher. So you get set up with that tool rest close, your speed up, and so what I'm after is to see this point come down just inside that rim there. Now sometimes you'll see fishtail. I don't fishtail unless my beading tool stops cutting. If I start to feel a vibration or it doesn't feel like it's cutting right, then I'll wiggle the handle back and forth. As long as it's cutting clean and it's going in, I don't mess with it. Because anything I do here is going to distort the bead a little bit. Now these beading tools are very easy to use, but you can't push them sideways. If the bead you're cutting looks like it's in the wrong place, and you try to push it sideways, it'll catch and run all the way across. So if I'm cutting in the wrong place, I back out, start to cut again. Right now, feels pretty good. So I'm getting a little chatter, so I'm fishtailing it slightly. I got to turn that around, I guess. Okay, let's do the bead on the lid now. So what I'm looking at, I'm going to wear you guys out. What I'm looking at now is I want to see the point of my beading tool go right down into the low point of the last. I think everybody can kind of get an idea. I'm just going to be here for a second. Like I said, I'm going to wear you out. and so that's what I'm trying to do. You're zoomed in pretty closely. You can see what I'm doing on there? Okay. Now, I doubt you can see it on the camera, and I usually have a whole bunch of light because I'm half blind. I've got my 10 power reading glasses on here. So I have a whole bunch of light, and as you're cutting that bead, you can see the flat surface gradually getting smaller until it's gone, and that's when you stop cutting. If you keep cutting with the beading tool after it's fully engaged, it can start tearing chunks out because it doesn't like to cut any farther than that. And that's why it's important that it be perfectly round. The other way you can tell is you got a half circle there. You can watch that point and you can see when the beading tool is fully engaged. You'll start to feel a little vibration. You know, there's a number of ways. So I've got that lid sectioned off. Now I'm going to work both directions from there. So I'm going to line up the point of my tool with the low point of that last bead. Now when I get within about 1/4 of an inch of the top, now see that last bead I cut, I went just a little too far, and so there's a little bit wider gap there. You can't fix that. Once that's done, I'll just make it worse if I try to do anything to it. So, you know, it's not a big deal. So I'm going to cut one more here. I'll try to pay more attention so I don't make another mistake. Now I'm going to cut down the bottom of the box. This is a pretty hard piece of pear. It's been drying for a while. Say again? Oh yeah, you don't want, especially if you're going to do a threaded lid. Now a box like this, it doesn't have to be a threaded lid, obviously, but you got to keep it together as you do the rest of the process, and I'll show you. Yeah, the drier the better, so that it doesn't go out around. Now I've seen people do basket illusion platters that weren't dry. The beading tool doesn't cut quite as cleanly, but they hurry up and beat it and color it and then let it warp, and it looks pretty cool. So now I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to go down to within about 1/4 of an inch of the bottom. Now I don't know if you can hear that sound. Let me push this a little too far. Hear that? That means I've cut the bead fully. If I keep going, I'm going to chip it. You can feel that in the tool too. You have to present the tool so that your point, even though the point on the right, if you're going this direction, isn't contacting anything to start with, your tool needs to be straight as you cut. Now, if I were working on a platter or something that had a different shape to it, I would be moving my tool rest so I could keep it as close to the piece I'm working on as possible. Okay, so that's as far as I want to go with those beads. Let's see how I did on my lid. Oh, I got lucky on that one. So I don't know if you can see that, but there's just the slightest little lip right there. But I've got a nice smooth bead here, and so that's a good one. That'll be, when that's closed, you don't see the joint. That's what you're after there. Say again? Well, I try not to cuss about it, but no, there's nothing. If it's not perfect, you end up with a really sharp edge there, and so you have to just knock it off just a little bit, or it's really sharp. And what you're going to do then is you're going to show where the joint is, and then you just use that for an enhancement. Instead of trying to hide the lid, you show where the lid is. And so yeah, there's ways to work around all of that. So the next beading tool I'm going to use is 3/16, and I like to use this on the top and the bottom of the box and on the rim of a platter and different places. And so basically it's the same idea. Now this one, usually you'll have to fishtail it just a little bit because it's quite a bit bigger tool. See, that's telling me it's not wanting to cut. Now I didn't look at the beads. Let's look the beads over and see if they're flat all the way around. See if there's any of them I need to cut a little deeper. They all look pretty good. Pear, like I said, pear is just a nice wood to use. Okay, so I've got my top bead and my bottom bead. What I want to do is define those a little more. And so I'm gonna take this little skew and use it like a beading, I guess, and do like a little bit of a plunge cut, just so I can get a feel for how that's looking. I'll do the same thing up there. I use almost all of my skews as negative rate scrapers, and they work really well. Now, as you know, with any scraper, if I'm going to be cutting with this edge, this top edge, and it's not cutting like I want, I take it to the grinder and grind this edge, and it gives me a little burr up there, and you can really do some really fine cutting that way. Now, next thing I want to do is burn the lines between the beads, the low spots. Now, this is something that I struggled with for a while, because one of the mistakes that a lot of people make is if there's any debris down in the low spot between the beads, you'll burn the debris and it'll fall out and you'll have a white spot there. And so I've got a brush that I'll put in there to clean them, and then I'll take a piece of fine sandpaper. Now I'm not sanding the beads. All I'm doing is making sure that I've got a good clean area between the beads. And so I'll stick that in there and just wiggle it. Now, this is one of those little things I do that maybe it makes a difference, maybe it doesn't, but it makes me feel better. And you can actually, here's a good one, you can actually feel when you've got a rough spot. I don't know if you can hear that. I'll get close. Can you hear that clicking? That tells me that there's a spot in there that's not perfect. Not a big deal. Again, the whole idea here is not to show off your beads, but to not create any distractions to the pattern. Now this is a piece of laminate, Wilson art, I think, probably post form, which is thin, and then I sand it down even thinner, so it's probably about the thickness of a piece of cardstock or something. The thinner the better, because I don't want to burn the sides of the bead. The only thing I want to burn is the very bottom between the beads. Crank this up a little. Now, between the 3/16 bead and the 1/8 inch bead, I want a little bit more burn, so I'm gonna get that darker. Now the whole idea here with this is to make it consistent, so I don't have a dark one and a light one and a dark one and a light one. I want them all to be really close to the same, again, so they're not distracting. Now you can do this with a wire on this kind of box, but in just about every other situation you can't use the wire. And so and then I want that one darker. That's hot. Then I'll clean it again a little bit. One of your enemies is the soot and the oil in your hands. Because what you want to do is you want to maintain as much contrast between the unpainted squares and the painted squares. So the more you handle it, the more you're going to distribute that soot around, and the oil from your hands will collect dirt. And so always try not to handle it any more than I have to. Now, I went ahead one step because I'm not going to be able to show you everything I do on the lid, but I want to show you a little bit. So the top of that's pretty flat. I maybe shouldn't have gone quite so far up with that top bead. So obviously, this is all going to go away, but that top bead needs to be more than half a bead. And there's something else that I did out of sequence too that I'll show you. And so I would shape that top to the curve that I want, and then take my 3/16 beading tool again and come in at a different angle. Now I'm looking down this side of my beading tool because I don't want it to cut into the bead I already have. So I want to make this as round as possible. Get my tool rest up closer. Now again, you can't push that sideways. If I do, it'll run across there. So if I don't like where I'm cutting, I can come back and I can start another cut. Right now it looks pretty good. Now this is straight end grain, so I'm going to fishtail it a little bit because of the kind I'm cutting. Now if you can see this little ridge right there, that'll start disappearing. Now you can steer this a little bit too. If it looks like I'm going too far this direction, I can bring the back of my tool over and drive it a little farther the other way. Okay, so that's gone now. Let's look and be sure. Okay, that looks good. And then what I would typically do from there is basically shape the top of this. Shape the top of that, put some beads on it. Before I go any farther with that, then let me show you what I do here a lot of times. So now if I'm going to put a finial on there or a button on there, this is a down cut router bit that I think is used in CNC routers and stuff as 1/4 inch. And so what I'll do with it is I'll come in there. A lot of times I'll put my finger on there because I don't want to go any deeper than 1/4 inch. So what this does is, because it's a down cut bit, it cuts as it goes down. If it was up cut, it'd pull the wood this way and give you a ragged hole. Go in this direction, it gives you a really nice clean hole. So that's how I do that top for the finials. Now, what I left out here is I want to see this 3/16 inch bead and this 3/16 inch bead. I want them to be a little bit proud. I want them to stick out a little farther than the 1/8 inch beads. And I should have done this before I did the burn lines, but we're okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to knock the top off of 3 or 4 of these beads on each end, flatten the top of them a little bit. But I'm going to flare it. The first one I'll take the most off of, and then I'm going to gradually flare out to nothing. So I'm going to take a little bit off of there. Same thing down here. And then I'll take my beading tool again and just recut those beads. You have to be careful about this to get your tool back centered. Now obviously I'm cutting away all those burn lines I just made, but we're going to do those again. You have to do it gradually like that or you'll really see it. And so you just gradually make those round again. I don't know whether you can see it on the camera, but now those 2 beads are just a little bit proud from the others. They stand out a little more. And then we'll just reburn those. If you have questions, just holler at me. So that's basically beaded. Like I said, I would bead the top. The lid stays on tight until I'm ready to put the final finish on. Because when I start burning the lines on this, then I want that lid to be snug, because it's easy to loosen a lid up, but it's a lot harder to tighten one up. And so that stays on there. This is a different style of box. It looks like the lid needs to be refit. What I discovered is I used to make these boxes in the same orientation with a tenon down here. And what I learned is that I can cut a groove in here to expand the chuck into, and then I've got the opportunity for more shape than I could before, because if I'm in the lathe this way, I've got the chuck in the way, not only of chuck jaws and whatever, but also when I get my beading tool in there, I don't have any room to work. Where if it's oriented this way, then, I've got a lot more opportunity for shape. The same with the lid. It's finished in this orientation for the same reason. And then another benefit to that is I can bead a box like this, take it off the lathe, and set it aside to do something with later. Whereas this one is going to have to stay in this chuck until I'm done with it. So I'll pass this one around. The other thing that is cool is when the lid gets tight like that, which it almost does because these boxes will go a little bit oval, I can put it on the lathe and just touch it right there with a parting tool, and the lid's loose again. This kind of box, you want the lid loose enough that it can be lifted off without the box coming up with it.
Which way does the grain go?
Say again?
Which way does the grain go on that? Is it the same side?
Yeah, straight up and down. Okay. Let's go ahead and set the indexing jig up now. I probably scared you with all the tools I brought, right? I'm hoping I don't use very many of them. We can pass that around too. But that stays in the chuck now until I'm done with it. So at home I have a dedicated indexing jig that's freestanding, and I have a 24-inch wheel on it that gives me a lot more options. This one right here has 192 divisions. Well, it has 32, 96, and 192. And let me hold that flat so you can see it. So it's held, excuse me, it's held in place with the chuck. So this is really high-end stuff here. But it works great. And I make these, and the students that take my class, I'll get to take one of these home with them because I think it's important that they're able to go home and keep doing basket illusion if they want to. And this makes it work. This platter over here that I passed around, you can do that with an index wheel like this, no problem. So what I want to do is I want to get this as close as I can. I want to get this as close as I can without rubbing. Now this is a lathe off situation. Don't turn your lathe on while you're doing this. This is lathe off. Now this little indicator lines up with a line somewhere. It doesn't matter what line. It needs to be parallel to that line, but it doesn't matter what the angle is. Doesn't matter how high it is or how low it is. It just needs to line up all the way along with one of the lines. It'll help if I get this out of the way a little bit. Get that control away from me so I don't punch that button. Now the pen needs to be in there flat so that those 2 points of that pen are parallel to the surface so that it's not canted, it's nice and flat. And you can tell when it's flat by putting it in there, touching one point, move it around, touch the other point, and if both points hit it at the same place, then it's flat. The other thing that needs to happen is this burning point needs to be exactly at center, dead center. Now, I like to say there are no rules in basket illusion. It doesn't have to be. If you're above center or below center, what you end up with is a little bit of a tornado. And I've done that and it looks pretty cool. But you either have to do it or not do it. If you're just close, it doesn't look cool. The other thing you can do is you can put your pen on an angle so that instead of burning straight across, you're burning at an angle. And instead of squares and rectangles, you end up with, I flunked geometry. What would you call that shape? Not a polygon, but yeah. And so there's a lot of stuff you can play with like that. But everything you've seen here is with the pen exactly at center height and not tilted in either way. Now, most of the videos you'll see, none of this stuff is there. You'll see a pencil on here, draw a line, move it, draw a line, move it, and then they take it off the lathe and take a skew point burning pen and trace the lines. I only did that a few times, and I didn't like it for a couple of reasons. The first reason was, maybe you've noticed this before, if you burn an area next to a pencil line or on a pencil line, it pulls a little resin out of the wood, and that pencil line is there forever. It gets coated, and you can't hardly sand it off. It's been my experience. The other thing is, as you handle it, that graphite gets on your hands, and the more you handle it, the darker that piece of wood goes, and you start losing your contrast when you do the ink. And so I went straight to burning the individual lines for those reasons. And then it gives me a little more flexibility. If you notice on this platter, I guess one of my signatures, which camera we got? This one? Overhead? That one. A lot of the basket illusion pieces you'll see will start with the smallest squares here and the largest squares out here. And that's only natural because as you burn those, the diameter gets larger and the squares turn into rectangles. And there's nothing wrong with that. What I've found is in my patterns, you see these little triangles, how they have stayed true triangles. That's because I've kept the burn lines closer to squares instead of rectangles. And so what I typically will do is a lot of times my squares out here are actually smaller than the squares in here. And so that's kind of my signature a little bit. The other thing I like to do is I don't like people to be able to see where I make that transition. So on this particular one, I think I started with 32 divisions. So there's 32 squares around the center. I went to 96. And the reason I go from 32 to 96 is because then I'm taking one square and turning it into 3. And then it gives me a center square still. Does that make sense? So I've always got a center square. So I go from 96 to 192. It's the same thing again. I've got a center square, so my pattern can stay centered all the way out. And then on this one, I went again, I need my calculators at 288. I think 288 is the next step that I went to. Yeah, with background burn. So these areas that have the background burn in them are just in half, because I don't plan on painting those. Those are just used for accent, basically. This is the burning pan. I'm not going to do any burning, but normally I have my burner and my wire, and I'll show you. It's that right there. No. Yeah, those come from carvertools.com, PJL Enterprises, and the reason I get them from him, and he's a pain in the neck to talk to, I'm telling you. The reason I get them from him is because he took the D-Way beading tools and made the tips so that they fit the D-Way beading tools. Now the RazerTip tips are 3 millimeter, which is just slightly smaller than 1/8 of an inch, and so they don't fit the bead quite as well. So this is the lid. Which camera are we on? The front one? Okay. So this is a lid that's just partially done. And I did that so you can see how that progression works. And so the beads in the center are 32 divisions, okay, and they come clear out here. You can see how they start small and come out here to where they're about 3/8 of an inch. So they go from about 1/8 inch to 3/8 in just 4.5 inches diameter, okay? So what I do is I'll mark the part of the pattern that's going to be on the 32 division beads. Then that gives me some lines to go from, and then from there, as you can see, these are 96 divisions, okay? So I've divided that bead into 3, so I've still got a center point. And then that gives me the rest of the pattern, and then I can come back with 192 divisions in these areas to give me some background. So I'm going to put this on, and I'll just kind of give you an idea how that works with the indexing jig. So again, I've cut a little groove. If you noticed in that box that I passed around, there's a little 1/16 of an inch deep recess in there that I can expand this chuck into. And I found that to be really accurate, because you're not digging your jaws in, you're expanding into that curved surface. And so it makes it so you can actually take it off like that box, and then when you get ready to burn the lines, you can put it on. Now, once you start burning lines, it needs to stay on until you're through burning lines. So basically, this won't line up, but it's as simple as, okay, on this wheel, I've got it marked. The blue lines are 32 divisions, the red lines are 96, the green ones are 192. So to start with, on a piece like this, I would line up with a blue line. We good? And burn across there, touching each one. Okay, so go across. Go to the next blue line. I got this out too far. Let me adjust it. Let's see, let's do it this way. Go to the next blue line, burn all the beads. Now that sounds like a lot of work, and it is to a certain degree. But you can burn the 32 division lines around a piece this size in 20 minutes. Go to the next blue line, lock it in place. So now I've got all of these burn right here, okay, all the way around. So I'll put a dot. I should have brought the pattern for this. I'll put a dot in the areas that I want to paint, the color I want to paint it, black dots on black, red on red. And then what that does, it gives me then the border. So I know from those dots, I'm going to burn out the 96 division lines. And so I'll burn those, put some more pattern on if I need to, and then burn the 192 division. Now that's the way you would do it on anything, whether it be a platter or a hollow form, whatever you burn, the process is the same on all of those. Questions? No? Clear as mud? Okay. Now, the problem we got here, maybe I can fix it, is that this doesn't line up. But let me see if I can make it line up. So, let's see. Let's do it this way. Let's put this on a blue line. I don't know why that dang thing's sticking out so far. Let's do this. That's better. The indexing jig I use at home, like I say, it has a 24-inch wheel, and it's got a detent pin. So I pull the pin out, move it to the next location, drop the pin in, and it's a lot faster than this. Okay, let's see if I can make this so that it actually looks right. I made this one. So it's just printed on my plotter, glued onto a, and then it's sealed, laminated is what I'm trying to say, and then it's just glued on. Okay, I think I've got that lined up pretty close. Okay, so now I've got this on a blue line, which is, every blue line gives me 32 divisions, okay? So I'll come in here, burn those, play like I got a burner on, there's a little bit of smoke coming up. One thing you don't want to do is have it so hot that it burns a big wide dark line. You want just a little tuff of smoke, and I would tell you what the setting is, but it varies with the piece of wood, how fast you're going, there's a lot of variables. And so basically I'm just pushing that into there. Now this is why it's important that the bead is round and doesn't have a flat spot. Because if there's a flat spot, the burning pin is round. And so I'll get burns on the sides and no burn on the top. And so now if I'm using a skew pen, burning style pen, where you're just raking it across there, it doesn't care whether the bead's flat or round. When you're using something like this, the bead's got to be as perfect as you can get it. So I've marked all of those. I move to the next blue line and mark that next row. And so I'll do that 32 times so that the entire top of this looks like this with 32 division lines. Okay? And then I will come back in with my pen. I'll have my pattern in front of me, and I'll mark the squares, the 32 division squares. I'll mark them with whatever color I'm going to paint that square. So that does two things for me. It's a lot easier to erase a little dot than it is a fully painted square. So if I make a mistake, it's not a big deal. So it lays out that part of my pattern, but it also tells me that when I start burning these lines, it gives me a point where I know where to stop. So the next thing I'll do is go to the red division lines, which are 96. And there, that square right there has a dot in it, so I know not to burn it. Burn those. all the way out. Go to my next red one. Actually, I go to the blue one. Burn. Now I've already burned the blue one, so I skip that one. So I go to the next red one. And so I go all the way around with that part of the pattern, and that gives me more of the pattern to fill in. Is that any clearer? Okay. And so that's basically, and again, once you start with this part of it, this needs to stay in the chuck, in the lathe, on the lathe, until you've done burning. Because if you try to take it off and start over, and when you're burning lines this close together, it needs to be precise. Now, a lot of people that do basket illusion, you look at a real basket and none of those lines are straight. And, I don't try to fool people into thinking it's a real basket, because my patterns are not what you'll find on a real basket. They're influenced and inspired by real baskets, but I like to go too far, as my wife says. She keeps telling me, don't forget that sometimes less is more. And so I have got carried away. But say again? It looks just like this. It matches exactly the beading tool, if the bead's cut correctly. So when I push that in to burn that bead, it gives me a nice burn all the way around, a nice even burn. And that's the goal. Again, the whole idea is to not distract from the pattern, because everything that I'm showing you here, you want to disappear and not for anybody to see. You want them to see the pattern. Okay. I covered that. I think we're doing pretty good. Now, the pattern. I spent a lot of years with graph paper because, it's a grid, designing patterns. And, that worked really well for a lot of years, but it was frustrating because the graph paper, the squares are all exactly the same size. So a pattern that looks good on a sheet of graph paper, once you put it on something that the squares aren't all the same size, it changes dramatically. The curved surface makes things change. And so I started using an app called Procreate that I can put on my iPad. And what I can do is, when this is all has, the 32 lines on it, I can take a picture of it, import it into Procreate, and then I can start drawing on it. And I'm drawing basically on the actual piece. Now, it doesn't generate anything for me automatically, but what it does is it gives me a digital piece of paper, okay? So I can change pens I'm using, I can change colors, I can create layers, and so I can start drawing in a pattern, and if I don't like it, I can erase it, or if I think I like it but I'm not sure, I can save it and go a little farther on it, go back to the original one if I want, and so it gives me a lot of flexibility. And that's probably helped me go quite a few steps farther into this because of the flexibility that it's given me, the ability to really get deep into patterns. Because when you're drawing it on a piece of paper and you make a mistake, it's like, okay, I've had enough of that, and which you do. I mean, you can't do it without making a mistake. I can't anyway. And so that program has made it possible for me to do that. Now, another thing you can do is I can take a photograph of this with my camera, my phone camera. I can print it. I can draw on the photograph. Okay? Same thing. Now I've got the shape in front of me and the size of the squares, So it gives me the ability then to actually be drawing on something so I know pretty close what it's going to look like when it's done. So that's a huge thing too. And so you can do it that way too. Exactly. In fact, I've already put what I call the base grid on. In this one, the base grid is 32 divisions. So when I take the picture of this, the whole thing would look like that. And so yeah, I know how many beads there are out here. I do. Well, if I'm doing boxes about this same size, they're usually within 1 or 2 beads of each other. And so before I even turn something like this, I can have an idea what my pattern's going to be. Now, when you say library of patterns, I've got thousands of patterns that nobody will ever see because they're terrible. They don't just spew out, I guarantee you. It's usually 10 or 11 o'clock at night laying in bed with my iPad. My wife says, "What are you doing?" And so I get something that I think looks good, and it's always interesting the next morning to pull it up and see exactly what I got. Sometimes it's good, sometimes not so good. I think I've covered it kind of in a nutshell. I use Faber-Castell India ink pens. Now there's several different ones you can get. I use the brush tip. Now they make one that has a little felt point and it has a protected metal around it that a lot of guys use. I don't like those because the little felt tip bends and dulls almost immediately, plus the little protector area won't let me get down deep between the beads. With the brush tip, you have to be a little more careful because you're getting down in there farther, and you don't want to paint the bead next to it that's not supposed to be that color, and so you have to be a little bit careful. That's where the burn lines come in handy, is that gives you a place to stop. And the secret is consistency. If you're all the way down, then you try to be all the way down on all of them. If you're just off of that a little bit, you try to make it consistent so that you don't have something that jumps out at you that detracts from the pattern. Yeah, these are 6-power reading glasses. I use a lot of magnification, and I have a light comes this way and a light comes this way and another light on here so I can see where that is. And so, yeah, that's important. When I paint it? Yeah, when I start painting, I'm done on the lathe. I've burned all the lines I'm going to burn. I take it and, again, magnification and light. Lauren knows that. Lauren does beautiful basket illusion pieces. Oh, come on now. And I've been criticized because I leave the back of that like that, and it's okay. I mean, a lot of people say, "Wow, now I can see how that's put together." But to be really honest with you, just amongst us wood turners, by the time I get through with this side, I'm tired of it. I don't want to do that side. That's the real reason, but I won't admit that anywhere but here. Now, when you do a box like this, the lid, am I in the right place? The lid, like I said, is on really tight, okay? And so I've painted all the squares. I'm done with it except for spraying the finish on it, and I like to put satin lacquer. That's how I like to finish them. And so that's when the lid comes off, okay? Now it's really easy if the lid's too tight, which it should be, it's really easy just to take the lid on a fine piece of sandpaper, do that, put it on, check it, and it'll walk into the point where the pattern lines up perfectly. So, and that's how you line up grain on any box, right? If you're making a box that you want the grain to line up on, that's how you walk it in slowly. And so I make sure that lid is really tight. I have had some that are not tight enough, so I take medium CA and put dots around there, let it dry, smooth it out, put more dots around there, so I finally created a little film that I can sand, and then I can tighten the lid up. It's a lot easier the other way, but that works too if your lid's too loose. And the tenon, when you take the tenon off of this, see, this is bored out pretty straight. I'll put it on here this way and take the tenon off. Then the box is ready to be painted. More questions? We got through this pretty good. Did anybody understand what I told you? Yeah, we got somebody coming into the class. When? Or what do we do? We start right from the beginning. Everybody, my goal in the class is for everybody to go home with a completed project, completed box, and the tools to do more when they get home. And in the first class, we were able to do that. Everybody finished the box. I sent them home with a box blank. And so everybody finished the box, looked like everybody was happy, and went home with everything they needed to keep doing it. And so, you know, a lot of times you go to demonstrations or even classes, and when you get home, you forget. You know, it's like, now, how was I supposed to do this? And so it excites me for the students to be able to go completely through the process and then have something in their hand to look at. And another pattern, I have the patterns. I don't expect anybody to sit down and create a pattern for that box. I have patterns that they can choose from to do on their box. They're not complicated patterns, but they look really well. They look complicated. When you break them down, they're pretty straightforward and simple. And so we had 11 students, and we had success with every single one of them. So I was tickled. For my first class, you know, it starts on Monday, and by the end of the day, Monday, I'm thinking, oh man, I'm in trouble. Because I saw a lot of people with this deer in the headlights look. So 3 o'clock Tuesday morning, I got up and made a new pattern. What was a really simple pattern, a straightforward pattern. Brought it into class, stuck it out there and said, okay, this is the pattern we're doing. And I swear there was a cheer. Everybody goes, yeah! Because it made sense to them. It's hard for me, where I've done it so much, to really see it through the eyes of somebody that's never done it. And so I think I got over that hurdle, and from there on it was pretty smooth sailing. Scott Cherry was my assistant, and he was golden. He was golden. He's, you know, the people they have here at Craft Supplies are just unbeatable. So it's a great experience to come to a class. I'm not trying to promote my class, but we have a lot of fun.